On a night of routine enforcement, the police checkpoint proceeded with its usual seriousness. It was then that a luxury car was pulled over, and from its interior, stumbling and reeking of alcohol, emerged the mayor's son. With the typical arrogance of someone who feels above the law, he was approached by a female officer. Instead of cooperating, the visibly intoxicated young man slapped the officer's face, sneering, "Do you know who my father is? I can end your career in the blink of an eye." The officer, however, maintained her unshakable calm. Without raising her voice, she handcuffed him with surgical precision. Then, with a look that made the young man's blood run cold, she revealed her true identity. "I am the chief oversight judge of this city, and yes, I know who your father is, but now you're going to know who I am." The mayor's son's mocking smile vanished, replaced by icy dread as he realized he had challenged not just a police officer, but justice itself incarnate. The air on the avenue, previously filled with the monotonous hum of traffic and the night's murmur, became dense, almost palpable. The silence that followed the chief oversight judge's revelation was not merely the absence of sound. It was a suffocating vacuum, an abyss that swallowed any trace of the mayor's son's arrogance. His eyes, previously bloodshot from intoxication and disdain, now reflected an icy terror, a mirror of his belated understanding of his monumental error. He hadn't just assaulted an officer. He had slapped the face of the city's highest judicial authority, the woman who held the power to dismantle not only his life, but perhaps his father's career and the reputation of an entire administration. The handcuffs, previously a mere metallic accessory, now seemed to weigh tons on his wrists, a cold and undeniable reminder of his new reality. The mocking smile that had adorned his face mere seconds before had disintegrated, replaced by a pallor that rivaled the headlights' glow. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat, transforming into a pathetic choke. The alcohol, which had previously impelled him to bravado, now betrayed him, leaving him naked and vulnerable before the judge's relentless seriousness. She, in turn, showed not an ounce of satisfaction or triumph. Her expression remained unchanged, a mask of professionalism and determination. She was the personification of the law, cold, calculating, and unshakable. With a subtle nod, she indicated to the other officers present to approach. No one dared to question. The respect and fear the chief oversight judge inspired were absolute. The officers, previously mere shocked observers, now acted with robotic efficiency, aware they were witnessing a watershed moment in the city's history. "Take him to internal affairs," her voice cut through the silence with the precision of a scalpel. "Not to the regular police station. I will conduct the interrogation myself. And I want the mayor's chief of staff to be notified immediately. Not the mayor yet, only the chief of staff. And inform him that his son is in internal affairs custody for assaulting an officer in the line of duty and contempt of authority, and that the officer in question is me." With each word, the mayor's son felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. Internal affairs. It wasn't the police station where his father could pull some strings, make a few calls, and resolve the situation with an apology and a fine. Internal affairs was the internal tribunal, the bastion of police and judicial integrity. It was where errors were exposed and careers ended. And she, the chief oversight judge, was personally taking on the case. It was the worst imaginable scenario, a nightmare he never thought would come true. As he was led to the patrol car, the mayor's son cast a last, desperate look at the judge. His eyes pleaded, but met only the hardness of a diamond. There was no clemency, no room for negotiation. Justice, at that moment, was blind to surnames, deaf to power, and mute to pleas. The news, like a virus, would begin to spread, first among the officers at the checkpoint, then to central dispatch, and soon to the corridors of municipal power. The slap he delivered was not just against a woman's face, it was a blow against the structure of an entire city, a direct challenge to the authority that now rose to crush him. And the chief oversight judge, with her impeccable demeanor and steely gaze, was just beginning to show the mayor's son and all who felt above the law that no one, absolutely no one, was immune to her jurisdiction. The night had barely begun, and the fate of many was about to be rewritten. The silence that swallowed the avenue did not dissipate with the departure of the patrol car. On the contrary, it solidified, transforming into a heavy layer that hung over the city. Inside the car, the mayor's son, once a volcano of arrogance, was now just a heap of dread and alcohol, cowering in the back seat. The handcuffs, cold and relentless, were the only palpable truth amidst the blur of his intoxicated mind. Every turn, every passing headlight, seemed like a nail hammered into his coffin of privilege. He wasn't being taken to the usual police station, where familiar faces and old favors could smooth things over. No, he was on his way to internal affairs, a name that, until then, was just an abstract concept, an ivory tower from which his father and he considered themselves immune. Now it was his destiny, and the chief oversight judge, his executioner. As the patrol car drove away, the chief oversight judge, whose name was Ana Lucia, remained standing for a moment, watching the taillights disappear into the darkness. There was no triumph in her gaze, only an iron determination. That slap had not just been a physical assault, it had been a direct challenge to her authority, an affront to the very idea of justice she had sworn to uphold, and she would not allow it to go unpunished. With a precise gesture, she picked up the radio on her belt. "Dispatch, this is Chief Oversight Judge Ana Lucia. Confirm notification to the Mayor's Chief of Staff. I want him informed that the Mayor's son is in Internal Affairs custody, and the reason is assault on an officer in the line of duty and contempt of authority, and that the officer in question is me. I repeat, Ana Lucia, confirm receipt and execution." Her voice was calm, but laden with a gravity that made the dispatch operators tremble. It was the voice of the law, unshakable and uncompromising. The other officers at the checkpoint who witnessed the scene were in silent shock. They knew the chief oversight judge's reputation, her unyielding integrity, her aversion to any form of corruption or abuse of power. But to see her in action, handcuffing the mayor's son with her own hands, revealing her identity with that calculated coolness, was something that would be etched in their memories forever. It was a visceral reminder that under her jurisdiction, no one was above the law, not even the children of the most powerful. In the mayor's office, the news arrived like a bolt from the blue. The phone of the chief of staff, Dr. Ricardo, rang with unusual urgency. On the other end of the line, the voice of the police dispatcher was almost a whisper, laden with dread. "Dr. Ricardo, it's about the mayor's son. He's been arrested by the chief oversight judge." Ricardo felt his blood run cold. The mayor's son was a constant problem, but never something his father's influence couldn't resolve with a discreet phone call or a little favor. But the chief oversight judge, that woman was a force of nature, an unshakable rock. She didn't accept little favors. "What happened, for God's sake?" he asked, his voice tense. The dispatcher's reply was a blow. Assault on an officer in the line of duty, contempt. And the officer was herself, Dr. Ricardo, Chief Oversight Judge Ana Lucia. The penny dropped with a dull thud. It wasn't just an incident. It was a declaration of war. The mayor's son hadn't just assaulted an officer, he had slapped the very face of justice, personified by the city's most feared and respected woman. Ricardo knew this wouldn't be resolved with an apology. This was a scandal of epic proportions, a political crisis that could bring down the entire administration. The mayor, his mentor and longtime friend, was about to face the biggest challenge of his career, and all because of his son's recklessness. Meanwhile, Judge Ana Lucia was already on her way to internal affairs. She was in no hurry, but every movement was deliberate. Every thought, a piece on the board she was setting up. Internal affairs was no ordinary building. It was a fortress of concrete and glass, with silent corridors and soundproof interrogation rooms. A place where truth was extracted and justice served unadorned. It was there that the mayor's son was being taken, for a confrontation he never imagined, and for a lesson he would never forget. Ana Lucia's mind worked at high speed, anticipating every step, every possible maneuver by the defense. She knew the mayor would use all his influence, all his contacts, but she also knew she had the law on her side and the integrity of her institution. And most importantly, she had the irrefutable fact that the mayor's son had physically assaulted her. There was no denying it. The tension in the city was palpable, even for those who didn't yet know the details. A perfect storm was brewing, and Chief Oversight Judge Ana Lucia was in the eye of the hurricane, ready to face anyone who dared to challenge the law. The night was just beginning, and the fate of many was about to be sealed in the cold, relentless corridors of internal affairs. The internal affairs car glided through the night, a silent shadow swallowing the mayor's son within. Every meter traveled was a nail hammered into the coffin of his impunity. Alcohol, once a shield of bravado, was now a poison amplifying his terror. The city lights, once a backdrop for his excesses, now seemed like accusing eyes, blinking in his despair. He tried to compose himself, but his stomach churned, his throat was dry, and the image of Chief Oversight Judge Ana Lucia's unshakable face was seared into his mind. She wasn't just an officer. She was the personification of the law, and he had assaulted her. The full understanding of what this meant, of the depth of his error, was only now beginning to settle, heavy and cold like the handcuffs on his wrists. Internal affairs was no ordinary police station. It was a bastion, a fortress of concrete and glass that rose, imposing and austere, in the heart of the city. Its walls did not hold stories of petty crimes or trivial disputes. Here, the law was dissected, the conduct of the guardians of order themselves was judged, and truth was extracted with surgical precision. As he was led inside, the mayor's son felt the air thin, laden with a seriousness he had never before experienced. The corridors were silent, lit by a cold, impersonal light. Every step echoed, amplifying the sound of his own panic. He saw no familiar faces. There was not the slightest chance of a complicit nod or a look of understanding. This was a territory where his surname was worthless, where his power was a shattered illusion. Meanwhile, Chief Oversight Judge Ana Lucia arrived at Internal Affairs in her own vehicle, her mind already charting the next moves. There was no rush in her steps, but each one was deliberate, calculated. She knew the clock was ticking, that the gears of political power were already turning, trying to find a loophole, a way to circumvent the situation. But she was ready. Her integrity was her shield, the law her sword. Upon entering, she was met with looks of respect and a reverent silence. The on-duty team had already prepared the interrogation room, the audio and video recorder, and the initial documents. She didn't need to give explicit orders. Her presence was enough to dictate the rhythm and seriousness of the environment. In the mayor's office, the news exploded like a bomb. Dr. Ricardo, the chief of staff, finally managed to speak with the mayor, who was at a gala dinner. Ricardo's voice, normally calm and controlled, trembled as he recounted the details. "Mr. Mayor, it's about your son. He's been arrested by Chief Oversight Judge Ana Lucia for assault and contempt." On the other end of the line, there was an icy silence, followed by a roar of disbelief and fury. What? That's absurd. She can't do that. You know who he is. Call the police chief, the Secretary of Security. Resolve this immediately. Ricardo tried to explain the gravity of the situation, the particularity of the chief oversight judge. Sir, it's not that simple. She herself was the officer assaulted, and he's at Internal Affairs, not the regular police station. She is personally leading the case. With each word, the mayor's voice became more shrill, more desperate. He began a frantic series of calls to lawyers, to police contacts, to influential political figures. But, to his surprise and growing despair, he found closed doors, hesitant voices, and the same veiled answer. With Chief Oversight Judge Ana Lucia, things are different, Mayor. She doesn't bend. The power he wielded so easily over the city suddenly seemed useless against that woman's unshakable rock. The political crisis that was brewing was of catastrophic proportions, and the mayor felt the ground tremble beneath his feet. Meanwhile, at Internal Affairs, the mayor's son was taken to an interrogation room. The walls were grey, the furniture Spartan, a metal table, 2 chairs, a one-way mirror he knew hid observers. The smell of disinfectant and old paper filled the air. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant hum of the air conditioning. Every minute that passed was an eternity of dread. He tried to rehearse excuses, justifications, but knew none of them would suffice. The image of the slap, the disdain, the arrogance repeated in his mind, a personal horror film. Ana Lucia, in her adjacent office, reviewed the preliminary report. Every detail was important. She knew the interrogation would not just be about the incident itself, but about the message that would be sent to the city. This was a crucial moment to reaffirm the authority of the law, to show that no one, regardless of their surname or influence, was above it. She sought not revenge, but justice, and justice in her hands was implacable. The tension at Internal Affairs was almost palpable, a premonition of a confrontation that transcended the simple act of aggression. It was a clash between privilege and law, between political power and judicial integrity. The entire city, albeit unconsciously, held its breath. Chief Oversight Judge Ana Lucia, with her impeccable demeanor and steely gaze, was about to begin the interrogation that would seal the mayor's son's fate and perhaps redefine the balance of power in the city. The night was far from over, and the stage was set for a drama that would echo for a long time in the corridors of power. The silence in the interrogation room was a living entity, weighing on the mayor's son like a shroud. Every second stretched an eternity of dread and anticipation. The door opened without a sound, and Chief Oversight Judge Ana Lucia entered. There was no haste in her steps, no ostentation in her demeanor. Only an unquestionable authority that filled the space, making the air even denser. She wore no police uniform, but an elegant grey suit that, somehow, seemed more imposing than any uniform. Her eyes, previously cold and calculating at the checkpoint, now carried an intensity that seemed to penetrate the soul. She sat opposite him, across the metal table, without a smile, without a word of greeting. Just a fixed, evaluative gaze that made him shrink in his chair. He tried to muster what remained of his arrogance, but it crumbled under the weight of that gaze. His throat was dry, his heart beat a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Alcohol still blurred his mind somewhat, but not enough to mask the brutal reality of his situation. He was not in a police station where his father could make a call. He was at Internal Affairs, facing the woman who was the very personification of the law. Ana Lucia's voice broke the silence, calm, but sharp as a blade. It was not a question, but a statement of fact. "You know why you are here." He swallowed hard. I don't know. There's been a mistake. I was just going home." The lie sounded pathetic even to himself. She tilted her head slightly, without averting her gaze. "A mistake? You assaulted an officer in the line of duty." You assaulted me. You showed contempt for authority. You drove under the influence of alcohol, and you tried to use your father's influence to intimidate and escape the law. Each word was a blow, uttered with a clarity that left no room for doubt or interpretation. We have witnesses. We have audio and video recordings. Your refusal to take the breathalyzer test is, in itself, an implicit confession. The mayor's son felt a chill run down his spine. Recordings, he hadn't thought of that. His world of impunity, built on the premise that everything could be swept under the rug, was crumbling before his eyes. He tried a new tactic, that of victimization. I was nervous. It was an accident. I didn't know it was you. I apologize. Ana Lucia remained impassive. It doesn't matter who I am or who you are. The law is the same for everyone. Assaulting an officer is a serious crime. Contempt of authority too, and drunk driving puts innocent lives at risk. She paused, allowing her words to sink in. Your apologies, at this moment, are irrelevant to the legal process. They may be considered in a court of law, but they do not alter the facts we have here. Meanwhile, in the mayor's office, chaos was absolute. The phone was glued to his ear, but every call was a dead end. Renowned lawyers who once bowed to his wishes now stammered excuses citing conflict of interest or the gravity of the case involving the chief oversight judge. The police chief, his old ally, was visibly uncomfortable. Mr. Mayor, with all due respect, Judge Ana Lucia, she is untouchable. No one dares to interfere in her cases, especially when she is personally involved, and with the assault on herself, it's political suicide to try to hush it up. The mayor slammed the phone onto the table with a crash, his face red with fury and frustration. Untouchable? No one is untouchable in this city. I am the mayor. I put her there, in a way. He cursed, sweat trickling down his forehead. Dr. Ricardo watched, helpless, his boss's spiral of despair. He knew that the chief oversight judge was a force the mayor had never encountered before. She had no price, no fear, and no political debts. Back at Internal Affairs, Ana Lucia continued her methodical interrogation. She did not raise her voice, showed no emotion. She simply presented the facts, one by one, like pieces of an irrefutable puzzle. Do you remember shouting, "Do you know who my father is?" The mayor's son shuddered. Shame began to supersede fear. He saw himself through her eyes as a spoiled, pathetic boy. I don't remember well. I was altered. Altered enough to assault an officer in the line of duty. The question was not accusatory, but an invitation to reflection, to confront his own reality. Altered enough to believe your surname placed you above the law? With each word, the mayor's son's armor of privilege crumbled. He began to cry, hot, bitter tears streaming down his face. They were not yet tears of deep regret, but of panic and the overwhelming realization that his life, as he knew it, was over. There would be no little favor this time, no saving phone call. He was in the hands of Chief Oversight Judge Ana Lucia, and she seemed to have no mercy in her repertoire. You will be formally charged with the crimes of assaulting an officer in the line of duty, contempt of authority, and driving under the influence of alcohol, Ana Lucia declared, her voice maintaining the same calm, unshakable inflection. Your right to an attorney will be guaranteed, and you will have the opportunity to present your defense, but the facts, as they stand, are clear. The night at Internal Affairs was far from over. The perfect storm that the Chief Oversight Judge had predicted was now in full swing, and the mayor's son was just the first to feel the force of its winds. The entire city, though mostly unaware of the details, would feel the reverberations of this confrontation. The unshakable rock of the law, personified by Ana Lucia, was about to collide with political power, and the result promised to redefine the rules of the game. Justice, cold and implacable, was only just beginning to be served. Ana Lucia's final words echoed in the interrogation room, sealing the mayor's son's fate with surgical coldness. He was no longer the untouchable young man, the heir to power who dictated the rules. At that moment, he was merely a defendant, stripped of his armor of privilege. The tears, previously a cry of panic, transformed into uncontrollable sobs, a primal lament from someone watching his world collapse. He tried to speak, but the words tangled in his throat, suffocated by shame and terror. Ana Lucia observed him without a hint of emotion, like a scientist observing an inevitable chemical reaction. Her demeanor was the personification of the law, inflexible and impartial. She took no pleasure in the young man's humiliation, only the somber satisfaction of seeing justice begin to be served. Your attorney will be contacted and provided if necessary. You will be taken for the booking and custody process. Your rights will be read again and guaranteed. Her voice was a hammer striking the anvil of reality, forging the grim future that awaited him. Two officers, who had been waiting discreetly outside, entered the room. Their faces were neutral, but their movements were firm and professional. They approached the mayor's son, who could barely stand. The image of the arrogant young man who boasted his father's name at the checkpoint was now a distant memory, replaced by a broken man whose knees trembled under the weight of his own insignificance. He was led out of the room, his shuffling steps echoing in the silent corridor of internal affairs, each echo a reminder of his fall. Meanwhile, in the mayor's office, the night turned into a waking nightmare. Attempts to hush up the scandal had turned into a series of humiliating refusals. The phone, once an instrument of power, now felt like a dead weight in his hand. He called the governor, senators, the state's biggest figures, but the answer was always the same, veiled in euphemisms. With Chief Oversight Judge Ana Lucia, Mayor, things are delicate. Or more directly, no one wants to get burned by her. She has a power that transcends politics. The mayor, a man accustomed to having everyone at his feet, tasted the bitter flavor of impotence. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot. He paced the office like a caged lion, his fury growing with each passing minute. Delicate, delicate my foot. She's destroying my son, destroying my family, and by God, destroying my career. He punched the desk, making objects jump. Ricardo, his loyal aide, watched the scene with a mixture of pity and dread. He knew the situation was serious, but the extent of the mayor's despair was something new. Mr. Mayor, Ricardo began, his voice hesitant, perhaps we should consider a different approach. Perhaps a public statement, an apology. Try to control the narrative before it spreads uncontrollably. The mayor stopped abruptly, turning to Ricardo with a wild look. Apology? My son doesn't apologize. I don't apologize. This is a political attack, Ricardo. She's using my son to get to me, to show who's in charge. Paranoia began to take hold. He couldn't conceive that someone could act out of pure integrity without a hidden agenda. The idea of a political attack, however, planted a seed in his mind. If she was playing dirty, he could too. Prepare a press conference for tomorrow morning, immediately. I will speak. I will expose this farce. I will say that my son was the victim of a trap, of political retaliation orchestrated by an ambitious judge. Ricardo swallowed hard. Sir, that's risky. The chief oversight judge has an impeccable reputation. Attacking her directly could backfire. I don't care, the mayor roared. I have nothing left to lose. Either I destroy her or she destroys me, and I won't go down without a fight. While the mayor planned his desperate counter-offensive, Ana Lucia, in her internal affairs office, already anticipated his every move. She knew the silence wouldn't last. The political storm was inevitable, and she was ready to face it. Reviewing the reports, the recordings, the irrefutable evidence, She felt a cold calm. Her strategy was not one of attack, but of unshakable defense of the law. She made a call to her chief of staff, a man of trust and experience. "I want all the details of this case made public at the right time. No sensationalism, just the facts. Prepare a detailed official statement with the attached evidence to be released as soon as the mayor attempts any move to discredit internal affairs or the legal process." "Understood, Judge," the voice on the other end of the line replied, with the same determination. "We will be ready." Ana Lucia hung up the phone, her gaze fixed on the dark window where the city lights twinkled. She knew the battle that was brewing would not be easy. It would be a war of narratives, of power and reputation, but she had the law on her side, and that, for her, was the only weapon she needed. The mayor's son was merely the catalyst. The true confrontation was about to begin, a clash that would define the future of justice and politics in the city. The night was far from over, and the stage was set for a drama that would echo for a long time in the corridors of power. The entire city, albeit unconsciously, held its breath. The next morning dawned with the city in suspense, though many still didn't know why. But in the corridors of power, the air was charged with electricity, a palpable tension that foretold an inevitable confrontation. The first rays of sun had barely touched the buildings, but the darkness of the previous night still hung over the hearts of those involved. In the mayor's office, the fury of the previous night had solidified into a cold, almost manic determination. He hadn't slept. His eyes were red and bloodshot, but his posture, though tense, was that of a man who had made an irreversible decision, a final, desperate roll of the dice. Bitter, strong coffee couldn't dispel the weariness that weighed on his shoulders, but adrenaline kept him standing. He mentally rehearsed every word, every accusation he would hurl at his tormentor. The City Hall press room was packed, reporters, cameras, microphones, a jungle of equipment and curious gazes, all awaiting the announcement that promised to shake the city's foundations. The mayor entered, his team following closely, Ricardo with an expression of deep apprehension, almost mourning. There were no forced smiles or the usual political cordiality, just a somber seriousness, a heavy silence that preceded the storm. With a voice that tried to sound firm, but carried an almost imperceptible tremor, the mayor began his attack. He did not mention his son's name directly, but the reference was clear, painfully obvious to anyone following the rumors that were already spreading like wildfire. "My son was the victim of a trap, of political retaliation orchestrated by an ambitious judge who seeks the spotlight and power at the expense of innocence. A chief oversight judge who uses her position for personal and political ends, to advance her career without caring about the destruction of reputations." He painted a picture of persecution, of abuse of authority, of a chief oversight judge who took advantage of a minor incident to fabricate a scandal. The words were sharp, calculated to sow doubt, to discredit Ana Lucia before she could present her version of the facts. "This is not justice. It's a witch hunt, a blatant attempt to destabilize my administration and the order of this city. I will not allow a young man's life to be ruined by power games." The vehemence of his words was almost hysterical, revealing the desperation behind the facade of indignation. But as the mayor's words echoed through the microphones, being broadcast live to the entire city, Chief Oversight Judge Ana Lucia was already one step ahead. In her office, far from the media circus, she watched the news beginning to pop up on her tablet, a slight delay in transmission that gave her the advantage. An almost imperceptible smile of pure anticipation and cold satisfaction crossed her lips. She felt no anger, only the confirmation that her strategy was working. Her chief of staff, a grey-haired man with a shrewd gaze, entered the room, his face serious. "Judge, the mayor has just made his statements. The attack is direct and virulent, as predicted. Excellent, she replied without taking her eyes off the screen, where the image of the mayor, pale and furious, dominated the frame. Activate the plan, release the official statement now, and make sure all visual and documentary evidence is attached without exception. Within minutes, the narrative began to shift, turning against the mayor with astonishing speed. The internal affairs statement, meticulously prepared, was dispatched to all newsrooms, major news portals, and social media. It was not an emotional response, not a rhetorical counterattack, but a cold and irrefutable presentation of the facts. Details of the checkpoint, the exact nature of the assault, evidence of intoxication, security camera footage from the chief oversight judge's vehicle. Everything was there, attached, without circumlocution or embellishment, leaving no room for interpretation. The statement did not attack the mayor. It simply exposed the naked truth with the unquestionable authority of the law. The General Oversight Division reiterates its unshakable commitment to impartiality and the rigorous application of the law, without distinction of social status, political power, or influence. The process against Mr. Mayor's son's name follows established legal procedures, based on robust and irrefutable evidence of assault on an officer in the line of duty, contempt of authority, and driving under the influence of alcohol. Any attempt to discredit this process or its agents will be considered obstruction of justice and will be treated with due severity in accordance with current legislation. The reaction was immediate and devastating for the mayor. The press, which minutes earlier seemed divided, now had concrete, irrefutable proof in hand. The images, the transcripts, the reports, they spoke for themselves, refuting every word of the mayor. The attack that was supposed to be a masterstroke, a game-changer, turned into a self-inflicted wound, a political suicide broadcast live. Headlines began to change in real time. Chief Oversight Judge refutes Mayor with irrefutable evidence. Mayor's accusations debunked by shocking evidence. Mayor's son, the images that contradict his father and expose the truth. Public opinion, which could have been manipulated by the mayor's inflamed rhetoric, now saw the brutal truth with clarity, and indignation began to bubble on social media and in the streets. Back at City Hall, the mayor watched the disaster unfold in real time, on all the screens around him. His phone began to ring incessantly, but this time it wasn't calls of support, but from horrified political advisors, from allies who now wanted distance, from journalists demanding explanations for the discrepancy between his words and the evidence. His face, previously red with fury, was now pale with shock and despair, cold sweat trickling down his forehead. Ricardo, who watched the scene with a mixture of pity and terror, felt a chill run down his spine. "Mr. Mayor, I warned you. Attacking the chief oversight judge without a solid basis, without counter-evidence, was suicide." The mayor did not respond. He merely stared at the TV screen, where a reporter displayed images of the checkpoint, with his son, in a deplorable state, being handcuffed, the chief oversight judge's hand visibly marked by the slap. The reporter's voice, cold and objective, narrated the events, deconstructing every word the mayor had uttered minutes earlier, turning him into a national liar. The unshakable rock of the law, personified by Ana Lucia, not only collided with the mayor's political power, it pulverized him in public, exposing his fragility and hypocrisy to the entire city. The war of narratives had been won before it even began, not by brute force, but by simple, powerful truth, armed with irrefutable evidence. Ana Lucia, for her part, continued her work. The mayor's press conference, the media frenzy, none of it fazed her. To her, it was just noise, an expected stage in the process. The legal process would continue, relentless, like a river following its course, ignoring the stones that tried to block its passage. The entire city was now watching, and the lesson being taught was clear. In this city, the law was in fact equal for all, and Chief Oversight Judge Ana Lucia was its fiercest guardian. A force of nature no one would dare challenge with impunity. The silence that followed the revelation of the evidence was not one of peace, but the deafening sound of an empire crumbling. In the mayor's office, the mayor, once a colossus of power, now seemed a shrunken man, his features distorted by a mixture of disbelief and terror. The TV screens, once the stage for his fury, now displayed his downfall in real time. Every channel, every news portal, every social media feed was a merciless mirror of his unmasked lie. The image of his son, stumbling and aggressive, handcuffed by the chief oversight judge herself, was a fatal blow, repeated exhaustively, etched into the city's retina. The phones rang incessantly, but the mayor couldn't answer. The voices on the other end of the line, once fawning and full of support, were now of panic, of flimsy excuses, of allies abandoning him like rats from a sinking ship. "Mayor, I'm sorry, but the situation is untenable. My constituents are demanding a position I cannot associate with this. The caucus is in shock. We need an explanation, and fast." The tone was clear. Political loyalty, as volatile as sand, had evaporated. Ricardo, the chief of staff, tried to approach, but the mayor waved him away with a brusque gesture. His eyes, previously bloodshot with anger, were now empty, fixed on the screen where a political commentator mercilessly dissected the mayor's fatal naivety in challenging internal affairs with such an obvious lie. The word resignation began to be whispered, first on social media, then on news channels, and soon, with more vehemence, by influential opposition voices. The city, once divided, now clamored for one thing: justice and accountability. While the city hall plunged into chaos, Ana Lucia, in her office, maintained the same unshakable calm. The media frenzy was merely the echo of the truth she had released. She felt no triumph, only the cold satisfaction of a job well done. Her chief of staff, the grey-haired man, came and went, bringing updates, all confirming the devastating effectiveness of her strategy. Public opinion was overwhelmingly in her favor. The credibility of internal affairs, previously questioned by some skeptics, was now stronger than ever. Judge, the public prosecutor's office has just issued a statement. They are opening a preliminary inquiry into the mayor's conduct based on allegations of obstruction of justice and an attempt to discredit a public institution, the chief of staff informed her. With a glint of admiration in his eyes, Ana Lucia merely nodded, as expected. "Make sure all our documentation is ready to be shared with the public prosecutor's office without delay, and prepare a detailed report on the implications of an executive head attempting to interfere in a judicial process. This will be crucial for the next steps." She knew that the mayor's downfall would not just be a matter of public opinion or resignation. The legal ramifications would be profound. The desperate attempt to protect his son had, ironically, exposed the mayor himself to a legal vulnerability he never imagined. The son's assault, contempt, intoxication, all of it was just the tip of the iceberg. The real battle now turned to the integrity of the municipal administration and the mayor's own conduct. The process against the mayor's son, in turn, advanced with implacable swiftness. With the irrefutable evidence and massive public repercussion, there was no room for maneuvers or delays. Bail was denied, and the custody hearing resulted in his preventive detention on the grounds of risk of reoffending and attempted flight, given the gravity of the facts and his father's influence. The image of the young man, now without his former arrogance, being led handcuffed to detention, was another nail in the mayor's political coffin. The entire city felt the change in the air. That day was not just about the arrest of a privileged young man, but about the reaffirmation of a fundamental principle: no one was above the law. Conversations in the streets, in cafes, in offices were unanimous. There was a sense of relief that justice, sometimes so distant, had finally manifested with full force. Ana Lucia had become, in a few hours, a symbol of integrity and courage, the personification of hope in a system many believed to be corrupt. But Ana Lucia was not deluded. The victory in the war of narratives was only the first step. Power, when cornered, could be even more dangerous. The mayor, even in disgrace, still had connections, still had resources. The battle for truth and justice was a marathon, not a sprint. She knew the storm had not yet completely passed. The fall of a powerful leader always left a vacuum, and in that vacuum, new threats could emerge. Her gaze, fixed on the city stretching beyond her window, was one of vigilance. The law had prevailed, but the fight to keep it standing was eternal. The stage was set for the next acts, and Ana Lucia was ready for each of them. The silence in the mayor's office was now a vacuum, heavy and oppressive, filled only by the distant hum of televisions that continued to hammer home his ruin. The man who minutes before had railed with the arrogance of power was now a pathetic figure, huddled in his chair, his eyes fixed on an invisible point. The calls ceased, not for lack of attempts, but because no one wanted to speak with him anymore. The few remaining aides, Ricardo included, moved like ghosts, aimlessly organizing papers, avoiding their boss's gaze, as if the disaster were contagious. The word resignation, once a whisper, now echoed openly in the news, on social media, and even in the corridors of City Hall. The opposition, reinvigorated, was already preparing impeachment motions, certain that public opinion was solidly on their side. The fall was no longer a possibility. It was a matter of time, and how painful it would be. Meanwhile, the city was buzzing. The initial relief of seeing justice prevail began to give way to a new wave of questions. If the mayor was so corrupt, who else was involved? How many other privileges had been granted? How many crimes covered up? The arrest of the mayor's son was just the tip of the iceberg, and Internal Affairs, by exposing the truth, had inadvertently opened Pandora's box. Trust in institutions, already fragile, was now under intense scrutiny. People wanted more than just the fall of one man. They wanted a deep cleansing, a guarantee that the law, in fact, would apply to everyone without exception. And, as predicted, the dirty war began. The council members loyal to the mayor, those whose names were already being meticulously catalogued in Ana Lucia's dossiers, emerged from the shadows. In impromptu press conferences and inflammatory statements on social media, they launched a smear campaign against Internal Affairs. The accusations were predictable. Political persecution, abuse of power, attempted coup against the democratically elected administration. Media outlets aligned with the mayor, still with remnants of his influence, echoed these narratives, trying to sow doubt and discord among the population. Opinion pieces questioned the chief oversight judge's hidden motivation, insinuating political ambitions and a personal agenda behind her actions. Small groups of clearly orchestrated protesters appeared in front of Internal Affairs, brandishing signs with slogans calling for the mayor's freedom and the dismissal of the tyrannical judge. The tension in the city, which seemed to have subsided, reignited, now with a new and dangerous dimension. In the eye of this storm, Ana Lucia maintained her unshakable serenity. The external chaos was just noise to her, a calculated distraction that did not alter her focus. Her office remained a sanctuary of order and logic, where every movement was meticulously planned. Her chief of staff, his voice laden with a mixture of concern and admiration, brought updates on the smear campaign. "Judge, they are trying to discredit our every step. The council members are using the Tribune to attack your reputation and that of Internal Affairs." Ana Lucia merely nodded, her eyes fixed on a city map on her desk, as if visualizing the battlefield. As expected, they are desperate. It's the last card of a dying power. Activate our response plan. It's time to release the dossier on these council members. The Public Prosecutor's Office is already aware of our findings regarding their financial relationships and voting history. Let the truth speak for itself. The response from Internal Affairs was surgical and devastating. In a series of press releases, accompanied by a joint statement from the Public Prosecutor's Office, the dossiers on the council members loyal to the mayor were made public. Details of favoritism schemes, questionable votes on dubious projects, and, in some cases, financial movements incompatible with their incomes were exposed. The narrative of political persecution crumbled under the weight of the evidence. The population, which for a brief moment might have been influenced by the smear campaign, now saw the new layer of corruption being revealed. Indignation transformed into an even stronger clamor for justice, not just against the mayor, but against his entire network of influence. The mayor, isolated in his office, watched everything with a growing sense of powerlessness. His allies, exposed and discredited, began to distance themselves, fearing being dragged into the abyss with him. The calls he had desperately sought before were now for him, but with a different tone. Veiled threats of whistleblowing, demands for explanations, or simply abrupt hang-ups. The network he had so carefully built was unraveling, thread by thread. His son's arrest, which once seemed the apex of his disgrace, was now just a constant reminder of how everything began to fall apart. The young man in every court appearance seemed more dejected, his arrogance replaced by paralyzing fear. The law, once a convenience, was now a relentless monster. As Internal Affairs and the Public Prosecutor's Office continued to unearth new evidence of systemic corruption, the city buzzed. The deep cleansing that people demanded was underway. It was not just the fall of one man, but the dismantling of a system of privilege and impunity that seemed to have taken root for years. Ana Lucia knew the battle was far from over. The network of power, like a living organism, would fight to its last breath. But with each new revelation, with each new proof that the law was, in fact, for everyone, hope in the city strengthened. The stage was set for the next acts, and Ana Lucia, the guardian of the law, was ready for each of them, certain that the truth, however painful, was the only foundation for lasting justice. The rock had pulverized the Colossus, and now the fragments were being carefully removed one by one so that reconstruction could finally begin. The silence in the mayor's office was no longer just a vacuum. It was a shroud, heavy and suffocating, that enveloped him completely. The televisions, once a cacophony of voices clamoring for his resignation, now seemed to whisper condemnations, each word another nail in his political coffin. He, who once dictated the city's course with a simple nod, was now a cornered man, his eyes fixed on nothing, his mind a whirlwind of despair and impotent rage. Ricardo, the chief of staff, and the few remaining aides moved like shadows, avoiding eye contact, loyalty a luxury they could no longer afford. The word resignation was no longer a whisper. It was a deafening shout echoing on every street corner, propelled by the invigorated opposition, which was already articulating impeachment motions with unshakable confidence. But the mayor's fall was only the beginning. The city, which had breathed a sigh of relief at his son's arrest and the exposure of the truth, now began to question. If the top leader was so corrupt, how many others were involved? How many privileges had been granted? How many crimes covered up under the cloak of his influence? Pandora's box, opened by Internal Affairs, proved to be much deeper than imagined. Trust in institutions, already fragile, was now under relentless scrutiny. People didn't just want the mayor's head. They demanded a deep cleansing, a guarantee that the law, in fact, would apply to everyone without exception. And as predicted, the dirty war began. The council members loyal to the mayor, those whose names were already being meticulously catalogued in Ana Lucia's dossiers, emerged from the shadows. In impromptu press conferences and inflammatory statements on social media, they launched a smear campaign against internal affairs. The accusations were predictable: political persecution, abuse of power, attempted coup against the democratically elected administration. Media aligned with the mayor, still with remnants of his influence, echoed these narratives, trying to sow doubt and discord among the population. Opinion pieces questioned the chief oversight judge's hidden motivation, insinuating political ambitions and a personal agenda behind her actions. Small groups of clearly orchestrated protesters appeared in front of internal affairs, brandishing signs with slogans that called for the mayor's freedom and the dismissal of the tyrannical judge. The tension in the city, which seemed to have subsided, reignited now with a new and dangerous dimension. In the eye of this storm, Ana Lucia maintained her unshakable serenity. The external chaos was just noise to her, a calculated distraction that did not alter her focus. Her office remained a sanctuary of order and logic, where every movement was meticulously planned. Her chief of staff, his voice laden with a mixture of concern and admiration, brought updates on the smear campaign. "Judge, they are trying to discredit our every step. The council members are using the Tribune to attack your reputation and that of internal affairs." Ana Lucia merely nodded, her eyes fixed on a city map on her desk as if visualizing the battlefield. As expected, they are desperate. It's the last card of a dying power. Activate our response plan. It's time to release the dossier on these council members. The public prosecutor's office is already aware of our discoveries about their financial relations and voting history. Let the truth speak for itself. The response from internal affairs was surgical and devastating. In a series of press releases accompanied by a joint statement from the public prosecutor's office, the dossiers on the council members loyal to the mayor were made public. Details of favoritism schemes, questionable votes on dubious projects, and in some cases, financial movements incompatible with their incomes, were exposed. The narrative of political persecution crumbled under the weight of the evidence. The population, which for a brief moment might have been influenced by the smear campaign, now saw the new layer of corruption being revealed. Indignation transformed into an even stronger clamor for justice, not just against the mayor, but against his entire network of influence. The mayor, isolated in his office, watched everything with a growing sense of powerlessness. His allies, exposed and discredited, began to distance themselves, fearing being dragged into the abyss with him. The calls he had desperately sought before were now for him, but with a different tone, veiled threats of whistleblowing, demands for explanations, or simply abrupt hang-ups. The network he had built with such care was unraveling, thread by thread. His son's arrest, which once seemed the apex of his disgrace, was now just a constant reminder of how everything began to collapse. The young man, in every court appearance, seemed more dejected, his arrogance replaced by paralyzing fear. The law, once a convenience, was now a relentless monster. As internal affairs and the public prosecutor's office continued to unearth new evidence of systemic corruption, the city buzzed. The deep cleansing that people demanded was underway. It was not just the fall of one man, but the dismantling of a system of privilege and impunity that seemed to have taken root for years. Ana Lucia knew the battle was far from over. The network of power, like a living organism, would fight to its last breath. But with each new revelation, with each new proof that the law was, in fact, for everyone, hope in the city strengthened. The stage was set for the next acts, and Ana Lucia, the guardian of the law, was ready for each of them, certain that the truth, however painful, was the only foundation for lasting justice. The rock had pulverized the Colossus, and now the fragments were being carefully removed one by one so that reconstruction could finally begin. The silence in the mayor's office, once a shroud, was now an epitaph. The city had spoken, and its voice was a thunder that resonated in every street, in every square. There was nowhere left to run, no allies to invoke. The impeachment motion, once a distant threat, materialized into an overwhelming vote in the city council. The council members, once his most loyal lackeys, now voted with the speed of rats abandoning a sinking ship, each desperately seeking to save their own skin from the tide of popular indignation sweeping the city. The inevitable resignation came in a cold, impersonal statement, read by a pale lawyer at a deserted press conference. Not a word from the mayor himself, no apology, just the bitter and humiliating realization of a reign that ended not with glory, but with public disgrace. His name, once synonymous with power and influence, was now a vivid reminder of the fragility of corruption in the face of relentless truth. For Ana Lucia, the news of the mayor's downfall brought no euphoria, no personal satisfaction that many might expect. Instead, a sober and profound confirmation that her method was correct. The mayor's fall was a fundamental milestone, yes, but not the end of the journey. It was merely the removal of the central piece of a complex board. The true battle, the dismantling of the network of privilege and impunity he had built over the years, was only just beginning to take shape, revealing itself in its full dimension. The Public Prosecutor's Office, now with an even stronger mandate and the unrestricted support of Internal Affairs, intensified its operations with renewed ferocity. The investigations deepened, revealing layers of collusion that extended far beyond the mayor's office. Overpriced contracts, fraudulent bids, shell companies, and systematic diversion of public funds into private pockets. With each passing day, new names emerged, new schemes were uncovered, and the web of corruption proved to be more intricate than imagined. Internal Affairs, under Ana Lucia's firm and unshakable leadership, had transformed into a beacon of integrity, illuminating the darkest and dustiest corners of public administration. The city, once divided and manipulated by the smear campaign, now united in a unanimous cry for justice. The demonstrations, previously orchestrated to defend the mayor, were now spontaneous and massive, demanding the punishment of all involved without exception. Trust in institutions, once shaken and fragile, began to be rebuilt brick by the relentless and transparent action of the law. However, the network of power did not dismantle without resistance. The fragments, as Ana Lucia called them, still possessed sharp edges and a surprising capacity to cause damage. Defense lawyers, with seemingly limitless resources, launched a multifaceted legal war, attempting to annul evidence, discredit witnesses, and delay processes with dilatory tactics. There were whispers of veiled threats to investigators and prosecutors, and attempts at sabotage in the City Hall's information systems, seeking to erase traces and destroy crucial evidence. The fight was now behind the scenes, in courtrooms and bureaucratic corridors, but no less intense. Judge, the law firm representing the exposed council members, is attempting a maneuver to question the legality of our preliminary investigations, her chief of staff informed her, his voice laden with palpable tension. They allege that Internal Affairs exceeded its jurisdiction and that the evidence was obtained irregularly. Ana Lucia looked up, unsurprised. Her eyes reflected a disarming calm. It's an old and predictable tactic. Prepare a detailed technical note citing every article and paragraph of the law that supports our actions, and ensure that the Public Prosecutor's Office is ready to counterattack with the same precision. We will not yield an inch. Every step we have taken has been meticulously planned and is strictly within the law. Transparency will be our greatest weapon against the smoke they try to create. She knew that dismantling a corrupt system was not a single event, a final blow, but a continuous process, a battle of attrition that would require resilience. The network, like an insidious parasite, had infiltrated every vein of the city, and its removal would require strategic patience, surgical precision, and unshakable determination. The mayor's son, in his detention cell, was now a ghost of the arrogant young man who had assaulted a police officer. His bail had been repeatedly denied, and his trial approached with irrefutable evidence and overwhelming public opinion against him. He was living proof that impunity had come to an end, and that the law, finally, applied to everyone. The city's reconstruction was not just about punishing the guilty, but about reforming structures, creating mechanisms for transparency and accountability that would prevent such corruption from taking root again. Ana Lucia spent hours with teams of specialists, designing new protocols, strengthening oversight, and training public servants for a new era of integrity and public service. The tension, though different, remained high. It was no longer the tension of direct and explosive confrontation, but that of constant vigilance, of the battle against inertia and the hidden resistance that still persisted. The city, which once held its breath in fear and distrust, now breathed purer air, but still with the caution of those who know that freedom and justice demand eternal vigilance. Ana Lucia, the guardian of the law, felt the weight of responsibility, but also the unshakable strength of conviction. The rock had pulverized the Colossus, and now the fragments were not only being removed, but meticulously transformed into solid foundations for a new city, where justice would not be a privilege for a few, but an inalienable right for all. The true fight for the city's soul was at its peak, and she was ready to lead it, step by step, towards a future of integrity. The mayor's fall was an earthquake, but the aftershocks, though less thunderous, were equally dangerous. The city, which had celebrated the victory of the law, now found itself immersed in a new phase of the battle, that of constant vigilance, of strategic patience against a resistance that, though hidden, was stubborn and insidious. It was the struggle against the inertia of a corrupt system and the cunning of those who still benefited from it. Ana Lucia knew that the rock had pulverized the Colossus, but the fragments still possessed sharp edges, capable of wounding. The first wave of counterattack came, as predicted, in the legal field. The lawyers of the exposed council members and other prominent figures who were beginning to be implicated launched a multifaceted legal offensive. Petitions and appeals rained down on the courts, questioning the legality of the investigations, the validity of the evidence, and even the jurisdiction of internal affairs. They tried to create a bureaucratic tangle, a legal smokescreen to delay the inevitable and, perhaps, find a loophole. Judge, they are trying to disqualify the entire process of obtaining data from City Hall. They claim invasion of privacy and breach of confidentiality without due judicial authorization. One of the prosecutors, visibly exhausted, reported during an emergency meeting. Ana Lucia, however, remained impassive. Her eyes scanned the documents with a disarming calm. Every step was documented. Every warrant, every authorization, every procedure was followed to the letter. There is no room for questioning the legality of our actions. Prepare the responses, detailing every article, every jurisprudence. We will flood them with truth and law. The response from Internal Affairs and the Public Prosecutor's Office was as surgical as the initial offensive. Robust technical notes, opinions from renowned jurists, and the presentation of documents proving the legality of each stage of the investigations were filed. The defense's smoke and mirrors strategy began to dissipate under the weight of transparency. With each attempt To annul a piece of evidence, Internal Affairs presented 10 that corroborated it, further strengthening the accusatory framework. But the resistance was not limited to the courts. Behind the scenes, pressure mounted. Whispers of veiled threats to investigators and prosecutors became more frequent, though never direct enough to be easily proven. Families of public servants collaborating with the investigations reported strange incidents, small acts of intimidation, seeking to sow fear and distrust. There were attempts at sabotage in the City Hall's information systems, fortunately thwarted by Internal Affairs' IT team, which had anticipated such moves and reinforced security. "They are trying to destabilize us by all means," observed the Chief of Staff with a worried expression. "It's a war of nerves." Ana Lucia nodded. "They are desperate, but with each attempt, they only expose the depth of their rottenness, reinforce the security of the teams, monitor any suspicious activity. We will not yield to fear. The law is our armor and truth our sword." As the legal battle and the war of nerves unfolded, the city slowly began to breathe purer air. Trust in institutions once shattered was rebuilt brick by brick. Ana Lucia spent hours with teams of specialists, designing new transparency protocols, strengthening internal oversight, and training public servants for a new era of integrity. City Hall, once a labyrinth of bureaucracy and shady interests, began to open up, to become more accessible and accountable. The population, now more engaged and informed, participated actively. Community meetings, once ignored, were now packed, with citizens demanding changes and proposing solutions. The local press, once intimidated, now published in-depth investigative reports, exposing the remaining fragments and maintaining pressure on those involved. The deep cleansing that the city clamored for was not just the punishment of the guilty, but the construction of a future where corruption would not find fertile ground. And the mayor's son, he remained in his cell, a ghost of the arrogant young man who had assaulted a police officer. His bail continued to be denied, and his trial approached, with irrefutable evidence and overwhelming public opinion against him. He was living proof that impunity had come to an end, and that the law finally applied to everyone without exception. His destiny, once a certainty of privilege, was now a symbol of the justice that was rising. But the fight was far from over. The network of power, like an insidious parasite, had infiltrated every vein of the city, and its complete removal would require strategic patience, surgical precision, and unshakable determination. The tension, though different, remained high. It was no longer the tension of direct and explosive confrontation, but that of constant vigilance, of the battle against inertia and the hidden resistance that still persisted. The city, which once held its breath in fear and distrust, now breathed purer air, but still with the caution of those who know that freedom and justice demand eternal vigilance. Ana Lucia, the guardian of the law, felt the weight of responsibility, but also the unshakable strength of conviction. The rock had pulverized the Colossus, and now the fragments were not only being removed, but meticulously transformed into solid foundations for a new city, where justice would not be a privilege for a few, but an inalienable right for all. The true fight for the city's soul was at its peak, and she was ready to lead it step by step towards a future of integrity. The city, which had celebrated the victory of the law, now found itself immersed in a new phase of the battle. That of constant vigilance, of strategic patience against a resistance that, though hidden, was stubborn and insidious. It was the struggle against the inertia of a corrupt system and the cunning of those who still benefited from it. Ana Lucia knew that the rock had pulverized the Colossus, but the fragments still possessed sharp edges, capable of wounding. Each day, the battle became more personal. One of the most dedicated prosecutors, Dr. Elias, had his car mysteriously set on fire in front of his house. No one was hurt, but the message was clear. It was no longer just about documents and laws, it was about lives. Ana Lucia called an emergency meeting, the usual calm in her eyes now tinged with an even deeper seriousness. This is no accident, it's an escalation. They are testing our limits, trying to break us through fear. Internal Affairs' response was immediate and public. A press conference was called, and Ana Lucia, alongside the head of the public prosecutor's office and the police chief, denounced the acts of intimidation. They will not intimidate us. Every act of violence, every veiled threat, only reinforces our conviction and the need to eradicate this plague. The security of our public servants and their families will be reinforced. And each of these acts will be investigated with the same rigor we apply to corruption crimes. The statement was a direct blow to the Fragments strategy, transforming their attempt at intimidation into further proof of their desperate criminality. In parallel, the mayor's son's defense attempted a final maneuver to postpone the trial, claiming that the climate of public lynching prevented a fair trial. They requested the case be transferred to another jurisdiction, a clear attempt to gain time and perhaps find a judge less exposed to popular pressure. Ana Lucia, however, had already anticipated this move. In a pre-trial hearing, she presented a detailed dossier on the impartial press coverage, the robustness of the evidence, and the independence of the local judiciary. The request was summarily denied. The mayor's son's trial would be held there, in that city, before the people he had outraged. The city, in turn, reacted with a wave of solidarity. Dr. Elias's neighbors united to watch his house. Citizens offered support to public servants, and a silent vigil was organized in front of the courthouse. A constant reminder that the population was vigilant and would not allow setbacks. Trust was no longer just being rebuilt. It was being forged in the fire of adversity, hardened by resistance and collective determination. Ana Lucia knew the path was long and winding. Corruption, like a weed, would always try to sprout again, but the seed of integrity had been planted, and the city now was willing to cultivate it with unshakable vigilance and courage. The fight for the city's soul was at its peak, and she was ready to lead it step by step towards a future of integrity, where justice would not be a privilege for a few, but an inalienable right for all. The entire city seemed to hold its breath. It was no longer the paralyzing fear of before, but a tense, almost palpable expectation that hung over the streets. The mayor's son's trial was not just a legal case, it was the referendum of the new era, the final proof that justice had in fact arrived for everyone. The streets around the courthouse were filled with a silent crowd, their eyes fixed on the oak doors, awaiting the verdict from a city that yearned for redemption. The air in the courtroom was heavy, laden with an almost ecclesiastical solemnity. The mayor's son, once a picture of arrogance, now seemed shrunken in his suit, his eyes downcast, avoiding the accusing gaze of the prosecution, and more importantly, that of the chief oversight judge herself, Ana Lucia, who sat at the prosecution's bench, not as a judge in this specific case, but as the main witness. It was a powerful paradox, the victim and the guardian of the law united in the same person. The prosecution, led by Dr. Elias, still shaken by the attack on his car but with an iron determination, presented the evidence with crystalline clarity. The checkpoint video, the images of the assault, the testimony of the supporting officers, the toxicology reports. Each piece of the puzzle fit perfectly, painting an irrefutable picture of unchecked privilege and gratuitous violence. The defense desperately tried to create cracks in this wall of evidence, alleging excessive police zeal, a supposed political trap, but their words sounded hollow, without echo in the reality of the facts. Then it was Ana Lucia's turn. She walked to the witness stand with the same unshakable demeanor that characterized her. Her voice, calm and firm, filled the silence of the courtroom. She described the night of the checkpoint, the alcoholic breath, the arrogance, the slap. There was no anger in her tone, only the factual coldness of someone reporting a crime. But it was her identity, revealed there, at the height of the confrontation, that gave weight to every word. "Do you know who my father is?" The aggressor's phrase echoed in the courtroom, and Ana Lucia responded not with words, but with the handcuffs that sealed the young man's fate, and by extension an era of impunity. The defense tried to disqualify her, insinuating that her position as chief oversight judge could have influenced the conduct of the arrest, that there was a conflict of interest. But Ana Lucia, with the same serenity, presented the protocols, the records, the witnesses. Every step was meticulously documented, every procedure followed to the letter. She was not just the victim, she was the personification of the law, and the law, in her hands, was implacable and just. The defense's argument crumbled under the weight of truth and integrity. As the trial unfolded, the city continued its vigil. The local press, now free and fearless, transmitted every detail, every testimony to a population thirsty for justice. The solidarity with Ana Lucia and her team was a shield against the shadows that still tried to move behind the scenes. There were reports of new attempts at destabilization, small pockets of resistance that emerged like weeds. A public servant who had collaborated with Internal Affairs had his bank accounts mysteriously blocked for a brief period, a subtle but sinister warning. Internal Affairs' IT team, however, acted quickly, undoing the block and tracing the origin of the action, which pointed to a law firm linked to one of the investigated council members. Ana Lucia, even with her attention focused on the courtroom, kept a watchful eye on these movements. She knew that the battle for the city's soul was multifaceted. The mayor's son's trial was a crucial symbolic victory, a milestone showing that no one was above the law. But the fragments of the Colossus, though pulverized, still possessed the capacity to wound, to try to subvert the system by more subtle and insidious means. The closing arguments were delivered. The prosecution sought the maximum penalty, emphasizing the gravity of the assault and the abuse of power it represented. The defense, exhausted and without convincing arguments, appealed for clemency, painting the mayor's son as a victim of a system that had exposed him. But the scales of justice already tipped heavily. The jury retired. The tension in the courtroom was almost unbearable. Outside, the crowd waited in silence, a mass of hope and expectation. Ana Lucia, sitting in her place, felt the weight of that moment. It was not just about one man. It was about the promise of a city, the reaffirmation that integrity, once planted, could flourish even in the most arid soil. The rock had pulverized the Colossus, and now the seed of justice was about to germinate, marking the end of an era and the dawn of another, where the law would, in fact, be an inalienable right for all. The mayor's son's fate was sealed, and with it, the message that impunity had finally come to an end. The true struggle, however, would continue, demanding eternal vigilance and unshakable courage. The silence in the courtroom was a living entity, heavy and oppressive as the jury deliberated. Every minute felt like an hour, every breath an echo in the void. Outside, the crowd maintained its vigil, a sea of anxious faces, their eyes fixed on the courthouse doors, as if they could, by the force of collective will, hasten the course of justice. For Ana Lucia, sitting there, the weight was not just of the case, but of an entire city that waited. She knew that this verdict was not just about the fate of an arrogant young man, but about the soul of an entire community. It was the trial by fire, the moment when the promise of a new era would be confirmed or shattered. Then, movement. The doors opened, and the jury returned, their faces unreadable, carrying the fate of many. A murmur broke the silence for an instant, before being stifled by a nod from the judge. The mayor's son, once so haughty, now seemed like a puppet, his eyes wide, fixed on the jury. Dr. Elias, alongside the prosecution, maintained a rigid posture, the tension visible in every muscle. The judge's voice, grave and solemn, cut through the air. The jury has reached a verdict. A collective gasp filled the courtroom. Regarding the charge of assault and contempt of authority, we find the defendant. The pause was agonizing, an abyss of uncertainty. Guilty. The word echoed, reverberating in the walls, in minds, in hearts. A murmur of relief and surprise swept through the courtroom. The mayor's son collapsed in his chair, his face pale, the image of privilege undone. Ana Lucia felt a knot loosen in her chest, but there was no euphoria, only the silent confirmation that the law, finally, had prevailed. Outside, the news spread like wildfire. The crowd erupted in applause and shouts of "Justice!" Tears of relief streamed down faces, a testament to the oppression that had been endured for so long. The sentence came soon after, severe and just. Years of incarceration, a hefty fine, and the loss of political rights. The message was unequivocal. No one was above the law. The mayor, who had watched the trial from afar in silence, without even a public word of support for his son, saw his empire crumble. In a few days, pressured by public opinion and the growing investigations by internal affairs, he resigned from office, citing health reasons. His departure, though expected, was another brick removed from the wall of impunity. But Ana Lucia knew the battle was far from over. The conviction of the mayor's son and the mayor's resignation were crucial symbolic victories, but the fragments of the colossus still moved in the shadows. The investigation into the blocking of Dr. Elias's accounts and the law firm linked to the corrupt council member was intensified. The IT team, now with unprecedented resources and autonomy, delved into the data, uncovering a complex web of money laundering and influence peddling that extended throughout the municipal administration and beyond. In a series of coordinated operations, Internal Affairs, in partnership with the Public Prosecutor's Office and the Federal Police, which now acted with full support and without interference, dismantled bribery schemes in bids, embezzlement of health and education funds, and fraud in public contracts. Council members, municipal secretaries, and even influential businessmen were arrested, their names exposed to the light of truth. The city, which once feared to speak, now denounced, armed with the certainty that their voices would be heard and protected. Trust, once a luxury for a few, was now a right for all. Ana Lucia, tireless, led the reconstruction. New transparency policies, anonymous and effective reporting channels, and civic education programs were implemented to strengthen the culture of integrity. The press, once muzzled, flourished, becoming a vigilant guardian of the new order. The city breathed purer air, but vigilance remained. Ana Lucia knew that corruption was a weed that would always try to sprout, but now the seed of integrity had been planted in fertile soil, cultivated by the courage of many. She saw the city transform, not just in its laws and institutions, but in the spirit of its people. The streets, once filled with fear, were now the scene of a new hope, of a community rising stronger and more united. The true fight for the city's soul had been won, not with a single blow, but with tireless persistence, unshakable courage, and the unwavering belief that justice was not a privilege for a few, but an inalienable right for all. Ana Lucia, the woman who dared to challenge power, watched the city being reborn. Her work was far from over, but the foundation had been laid. The rock had pulverized the colossus, and now, upon its fragments, a new city flourished, a beacon of integrity in a world that desperately needed light. The fight for justice was eternal, but the city was ready for it every step of the way, every day, towards a future of true freedom.